worked on the East Coast, I've been in California, I worked in Costa Rica in the tropics. So I have a good broad base of knowledge, but a lot of it comes from you sharing your information with me and vice versa. So today we're going to talk about how to get the best food source for the soil so our plants remain healthy. That goes for natives. Some people say, well, natives don't need nutrition. They need some, but you may also have the non-traditional ornamentals, natives in your garden, and you'll need to feed those. Let's talk about food nutrition for plants. I walked around the neighborhood before I got set up today, and I wanted to show you a couple things. This is a healthy leaf, because we have no yellowing, we have no brown tips. Now, let me explain a couple things to you. Just a couple things you might need to know. A leaf has a margin. This is the outer portion of this. This is called the margin of the leaf. This is called the tip. This is the stem, obviously, that's attached to the plant. Just some basic things. And then inside you'll see the veins. Okay, the veins distribute all the chlorophyll to the plant to keep it green. So we have the margin, the tip, the stem, and the veins. And that's important because when I start talking about them, you'll have a reference point of, okay, what is the margin? Okay, so that being said, this plant leaf here is a philodendron. It's not native, it's tropical, but it's palmately shaped like a palm. So this like this. You want to know that's palmate, and that's a simple leaf. Okay, there'll be a quiz, so pay attention. Palmate and simple. This is an ivy leaf. This is healthy, not Ivy League, ivy leaf. A healthy leaf, and then this is an unhealthy leaf. We can see that the margins are turning yellow and the veins are staying green. A good sign of nitrogen deficiency. So if your plant is starting to lose color or turn yellow on the outsides working in like this is, it's nitrogen deficiency. The veins are staying green for now. It'll eventually turn completely yellow and drop off. But you want to sort of get ahead of the game before it gets this bad. Nitrogen is the #1 deficiency in our soils, and it can be replaced by using manures, organic fertilizers such as bone meal, blood meal, or if you need a quick fix, there's nothing wrong with synthetic fertilizers to get your plant healthy as long as you start using organics to get your soil healthy. Okay, makes sense? The organics is what's going to keep our soil healthy. It's going to feed the microbes, the earthworms, all the microbial activity depend on the organics. I'll explain more about that. The synthetics are a quick fix. It does nothing for your soil. It's sort of like if you've got a headache, you take an aspirin, it gets rid of the headache, but what's the real cause behind the headache? Stress, whatever. So you can use synthetics. There's a place for synthetic fertilizers. I don't practice it, but if I need to make a quick fix, I would do that, especially if I spend a lot of money on a plant and I was gone for a while and I come home and I go, wow, it looks bad, throw some synthetic fertilizer on it. So nitrogen deficiencies will let us know that, and I'll give you a couple bullet points on that. The healthiest plants you can have starts at your soil. The second is the sun. If you're trying to grow organic vegetables or plants that produce flowers, you need at least 5 hours of direct sunlight a day to get the optimum harvest and the optimum flowers from your garden. Okay? 5 hours is minimum. The next thing would be the soil. Now, I did a little bit about soil last week. Basically, if you know your soil type, if it's really heavy clay, you'll need to amend that with some type of compost if you're doing vegetables and ornamentals. Most of your California natives can grow just about any kind of soil. However, some do better in a loamy soil, some will do better in a calcium rocky soil. So do your research. If you're looking at manzanitas or you're looking at the snow flurry ceanothus, those grow up in the Santa Monica Mountains. Nobody's up there watering, fertilizing, or even amending the soil. So those can take a really rough beating of all of that. Poor soil, poor water, and no fertilizer. So you can have those in your garden in an area where you don't need to do about anything with irrigating or soil amending. This is basically where you want to add stuff like vegetables or ornamentals in your garden. 5 hours or more is best. Then we're going to move down to the NPK. And so this is a class. This is a test quiz here. So all fertilizers have 3 numbers, or 3 letters. Is everyone familiar with the MPK, what that means? I'll explain for those who don't. So on every bag of fertilizer, there is 3 numbers, and this one happens to be 555. And I'll explain what that means. 555. So I know that the NPK, nitrogen is always first, 5% nitrogen. Phosphorus is always second, 5% phosphorus. And then potassium is 5%. So we call this a well-balanced fertilizer, 555. It could be a 10-10-10. If it was a 30-30-30, it would be synthetic, because most organics are below 12s, okay, 12%. Anything like 15% might be, it'll say if it's organic or not, but most of your synthetic fertilizers are going to be like 20-10-5, 30-40-10, 50-50-50. Synthetic, it does nothing for the soil. It will, like I said, in a quick fix, take care of the problem, but you don't want to be practicing that in the long run. So this is a well-balanced fertilizer, 5. I already know that it's organic. For the most part, it'll tell me Dr. Earth is all organic, but 5% is going to be organic because of the low number. That's just enough to get your plant healthy. If my leaf was looking like this, my plants were looking like this, I would probably opt to use this fertilizer here, because the numbers are 3, 7, 1. It lets me know that it's 7% nitrogen in here. This is the bat guana, which is awesome material here. 7% to green my leaf up. If I want to go organic, it'll take a while because organics take longer. You'll need to use more of it too. But in the interim, you're adding nutrients to the soil that are feeding those microbes that we don't see. They're feeding the earthworms that we do see. They're feeding all the little insects that are in the garden. That's very vital. The spiders, the beetles, all of those guys are really necessary in the garden because they're food source for someone else. So the chain continues. If you think about that, then I think that's a good way to think about gardening. So 731 will green up my plant. 555 will just give everybody a nice vitamin, if you will. If I was interested in producing flowers, which is going to produce a fruit or a vegetable yield for me, that would be the middle number here, phosphorus. This is going to give us the yield of promoting flowering and fruiting. Strong root growth and development enables the plant to transfer energy throughout the plant. Its deficiency is rare in the soil, so you don't have to use it all the time. It's available in many different types. I don't know what I did to the cap of this. It's going to drive here. It's driving me crazy. So if I wanted to say, if I were a nurseryman and I have thousands of impatiens that I want to sell, I want to grow them and make them bloom, because you're not going to buy impatiens that aren't blooming, or you're not going to buy a poinsettia that's not red, or an Easter lily that's not in bloom, because you're just not. You want it for the bloom. You would use this. This is called a bloom. It's called Beastie Bloom. Okay, and what that means in numbers here is that it has 0% nitrogen. It's not going to do anything for greening up my plant. It has 50% phosphorus, and it has 30 potassium. We'll get to that in a second. So if you want to increase tomatoes yields, if you want to increase flower yield, you can use a higher middle number to do that. It's not organic, so you would have to make that choice yourself. But there are organics that you can use, as we see here, 264. Okay, we'll do the same. It'll take a little bit longer. 264. There's 6% phosphorus. That's going to help produce more flowers, which will give you more fruit yield or more flower yield. So that middle number, phosphorus, we'll say it right there, 6. It's just known that 6 means phosphorus. And we know that's 2% nitrogen. It's a little boost of nitrogen, not enough to make a difference. Okay? And the last number is potassium. That's going to be represented as the K, And potassium will do a couple of things. It helps regulate and the plant to synthesize proteins. Sounds like a lot of science again there. But basically it helps the plant to increase resistance against diseases. So it's almost like getting an immunization shot. The plant, gets the higher ratio of potassium to help keep it against disease, soil-borne pathogens that can cause disease and viruses spread. So that number, I don't know that I have one here, but it could be anything like 3, 5, 10. That would be 3, 5, 10. 3% nitrogen, 10% potassium. And this is good when you're planting new plants into your soil, to your garden. So if you're doing a new planting in the garden, it's probably best to get something with a higher organic potassium, because your soil may not be as healthy as the soil that is coming from the nursery, or it could be vice versa. Maybe your garden soil is better, so the plant soil itself may not be as good, then you still would probably go ahead and fertilize with that. And fertilizer is probably the last thing we think about. We look at the flower color, we take that, we go home with maybe a bag of soil, and then we forget that if our soils aren't really organic and they're not really thriving with earthworms and insects, and we really can't see the microbial activity, you normally will see that in the results of your plant. A healthy leaf goes all the way back to what you put into your soil. Compost, manures, fertilizers. Back guano is manure. This has seabird guano, kelp seed, palm ash, all organic material that was alive at some point, whether it was through manures or through plant products. This is called marine cuisine. You don't want to eat this. But it's a 10-7-7 and 10% nitrogen. Perfect for anything in the garden. You can green that up, but it's also good for introducing new plants in the garden. So this is another product by Marine Cuisine. Kind of a cool name, I like that. And these basically are granule or powder forms. There's also spray forms. You just attach the garden hose, and then you can do two things. You can spray the foliage of your plants, because plants will take up fertilizer through their leaves. It's shorter lived though. It's not gonna make it'll make a quick difference, but it won't be a long or lasting difference because it won't be in the soil. So what I recommend is that you spray the plants, and then you do a root drench around the plant so the plant can soak up whatever you have left. I would also recommend that if you're doing a root drench, rake your mulch away from your plant base so that the mulch doesn't soak everything up. Once you've drenched your plants, you can rake your mulch back under. So there's powder, granule, there's and the liquid form of this. And this one is a 462. So what would that be for? 462.
Flower.
Correct. And sometimes it'll tell you right on there. Well, this one doesn't, but it'll just tell you flowering, super bloom, stuff like that. And this smells horrible. Do I have it on my face yet? Oh my God. Okay, if you have problems with raccoons in your garden, read the label of your material, because if it has fish emulsion in it, guess what? Those raccoons will be digging up your garden. So instead of fish emulsion, use seaweed kelp. I've made the mistake by doing both. I've done, fish emulsion, fish tea, compost tea is wonderful for your garden because it inoculates the plant. If you spray the foliage, it's going to inoculate that from diseases, viruses. It will take up a lot of the fertilizer. It's short-lived because a lot of it drips off and it's evaporated in the air, but the plant will take some of that up. As a root drench, it will probably do better, but if you really are having a problem with rodents and raccoons, get the sea kelp. It does just as good. It's all organic as well, and it's the same base. If you want to do foliar feeding, you can do roses, you can do just about everything that lives, you can do a foliar feeding. I don't think you'd want to do cactus or succulents because they already are filled with water for the most part. You don't really have to do any extensive fertilizing on them. So 3, 5, 10, 10% is the potassium on that. If I had a plant that needed well, just give you a couple just so you really understand that here. I'm going to erase that too, make it even harder. If I had a plant that had nitrogen deficiency, which is the number one, this is the first macronutrient, nitrogen, and I used 30, and say my phosphorus was 0, and my potassium was 3. Would that be organic, or you think that'd be inorganic?
Inorganic.
Inorganic, because you're not going to get nitrogen in the form of manures or potash or bone meal really above 12 to 15%. So this tells me already, even if I didn't even see it on the label, that this is going to be an inorganic synthetic fertilizer, which is good for doing the purpose it needs to do right away, but the objective is long term is to get your soil healthy. And that starts by using organic fertilizers, okay? And you can buy, all of these are sold here, almost every store will have them, some stores will have more. Dr. Earth has been around for a while, I use all their products. I recommend that when you're using stuff that's really finely powdered, you wear a little mask. You don't want to breathe it in. Just, first of all, it doesn't taste good anyway, but you don't want to breathe it in. So that you have the potash, and then you have pure organic fruit and flower mix. This, as I was saying earlier, has seabird guano, bat guano, etc. So let's go back to one of my favorites, pruning and trimming. I brought some things with me today. This, because of all the hot weather we've been having, has buds on the end. So what's happening is that in nature, the hormones go up the stem. When the soil temperature gets warm, the sun gets higher in the horizon, the conditions are right for blooming and budding, the hormones are reactivated in the plant. Persimmon-tree, there you go. So if this were growing in a place where I didn't want this growing, I wanted to trim this off, what would happen when I trim it wherever along the stem means that we are stopping the growth this direction, obviously, because the stem is gone, but the hormones are still going up. They're going to stop wherever the cut is. So wherever that cut is, if it happened to be here, if the next dormant bud, that right there is a bud. This is an old stem. I can see this is a bud. So there's all these dormant buds right here. There's one there. So wherever I cut, that dormant bud most likely will come to life and sprout a stem, but it won't be going this way. It's going to be going laterally. For example, if I took, we're just redirecting that. I brought some of these with me here. Twigs here. These are pear. So if I wanted to cut this, let's just say I cut this right here. Okay, so the apical growth has stopped right here. Probably want to go a little bit closer to those below. I knew that was going to happen. So now what happens is that these two stems right here are going to get all of that. Most of that is going to now go into these two stems here. So these two are going to grow up, and then we're going to end up with 2 branches going up like this, fighting for whoever's going to get to the top here. So ideally, that would not be the best way to trim a plant, but if you needed to top it out, you could do that. Or you could also go in here and cut above a node like this. I hope that isn't flying in space. Like this, maybe I should do that. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're going in here right above a node. You don't want to have a lot of space between that. In other words, if I cut here, there's no bud. The next bud down is here. So I want to cut just above that node because all this has to die back. So I'm going to cut there. Now we're forcing this plant that was growing straight up to become bushier. So if I need to make a hedge, a dense hedge, because I don't want to see the ugly building next door, I don't want this thing to grow so tall, I want it to grow in this way. So wherever I make a cut, we're going to cause it to grow in the opposite direction. Okay, make sense on that? So you're creating a denser hedge, thicker hedges. Also, by the way, 1 second on your question there. Also, what comes into play too is how close do you plant your hedge? Do you have a better budget so you can plant more? Or is your budget only going to allow you to plant them 3 or 4 feet away? If that's the case, then trimming these is going to be really crucial, and not with electric clippers either. Your gardener doesn't need to come through there with electric clippers. You take your pruners and you shape that so that you can create a dense hedge to give you the privacy quicker that you're looking for. Taking your electric clippers or even your shears is just going to create more of a nuisance for the shrub itself. So I would plant closer, and I would spend a little bit of time directing the growth of that plant, because now if I have it spaced here, I need, would you hold that for me? Just right there, just up like that. So what I would need to do now, my goal is I want these to grow together, so I'm going to cut here, sorry, and cut here. Now these are going to produce growth in this direction. So you can force the plant to grow in the direction that you want it based on where you put your cut and based on how far apart. This far apart will take a while. Move them closer together if you can afford to do that, and plant them. So you had a question.
Yeah, because it would be called topping.
Topping.
Yeah, you don't top until it actually has reached the desired height.
Correct. If
But
it,
you can do the sides.
absolutely. You want to do the sides in the beginning, because if this is the area that I don't want to see, this is my yard here, I don't need anything growing towards my yard, so I can just go through here. I would not take the electric clippers and go like that. I mean, I'll tell you why. You can go through and prune anything growing this towards my house, because it's not doing anything. By cutting it, we're now making the growth go this way. It sounds like a lot of work. You can go through here with these and do it like this. On ficus, it's fine. Eugenia, it's fine, because they grow back so quickly. But if you have a really special detailed shrub, maybe podocarpus perhaps, things that need a little more attention to, shearing it like that is okay on certain shrubs, but on a lot of those I would not do that in the beginning. I want to get the growth growing thicker, and then as they start growing towards my house, I can go through this. And then if I want to top it, it's 10 feet. I don't have to see that house anymore. I can bring it back down a foot. You're redirecting the energy, the hormones. Instead of growing this way, we cut it. It now grows that way.
And it won't be unhappy that it's growing more in the shade than even though it's still getting the sun on.
Because what happens is the plant acclimates.
Okay.
So you're forcing the plant to now produce leaves in a shadier environment,
Right.
which will be a larger leaf, because plants produce smaller leaves in full sun and larger leaves in more shade. Because in a shade plant, when this plant in full sun, the leaf will be smaller because it doesn't need a huge leaf to soak up all that sunlight. If it's in a shadier spot, it needs to produce a larger leaf because it needs more surface area to take up more sunlight.
Right.
Plants are kind of smart that way.
Yeah, much.
And we think, oh yes, but you're right. You can redirect the growth of that.
Okay.
So, and that's true on almost all your plants, not necessarily a pear tree. Actually, someone was trimming these one day, and I went and collected all these things. What do you want? Just give me all of them. So I took all of these. And it does kind of help you understand that on the stem of your roses, on the stem of your shrubs, there are dormant buds. If you can look closely and find them, you can direct the growth of that rose shrub away from the center of the plant, which is where you want it. You don't want the rose growing back into the center, because that creates too much shade, not a lot of oxygen, not a lot of airflow, and that's where disease and insects harbor, in deep shade. There's not a lot of airflow, the birds can't see them, the predatory insects don't know they're there. So by creating an open canopy, directing the growth away from the center of the plant, you're now exposing that plant to sunlight, which is great for the flowers we want, and you're exposing the plant to sunlight, which is decreasing the possibility of having insects that could cause more damage, and virus and bacteria, because the leaves never get a chance to dry out. Make sense on that? I had to learn that. It took me a long time to learn that one, but it does make sense when you start putting it all together. Now this leaf I found interesting. Wow. Anyone have an idea what they think that is? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or
Looks like an invasion. Injury.
close?
The sun burned it out. Insect.
Exactly, sunburn. There's a plant that this is a healthy. I don't know what I did with it now. Anyway, sunburn. So this is a tropical plant. It does not like sun. It will like dappled sunlight, yes, but not valley baked sun, because that's what will happen. So this was shaded, and then this has become, there it is. Thank you. This is the same plant. This is a leaflet off a plant like that. So this lets me know that this has been in deep shade because it's a larger leaf. This has been in a little more sunlight because it's a smaller leaf. Same plant. I just picked off a leaflet. But that got exposed to the sun, and that's what happened. So know what's going on with your plants. California natives, some prefer dappled sunlight, some prefer shade. Know that when you purchase your plants, do a little research. Know that your snow flurry ceanothus that grows in the chaparrals can take blazing sun. Know that your Salvia leucantha, which is not a native, but it's used in Mediterranean gardens, can do well in dappled sunlight. Not full shade, because you won't get all the flowers that you want to attract the butterflies and the hummingbirds. So know a little bit about your plants before you put them in your garden. This is another tropical ornamental. This is called a lobe, L-O-B-E leaf, because of its kind of lobe shape. Now, it's an older leaf, so most of your plants, back up, all plants cannot keep every leaf they ever bear. It just, the older leaves turn yellow and they fall off. People call me and go, oh my God, my leaves are turning yellow. I don't know what's going on. Well, where is it at on the hierarchy of your plant? If it's on the lower structure of your plant and the top plants are looking healthy and the new growth is bright green, chances are that leaf has had its day, it's just dying. But if it's the new growth that is looking more like this or that, then you know there's a problem. It could be sunburn, it could be nitrogen. If it's the newer foliage looks healthy and the older foliage beneath it starts to look like this, or even turning yellow and dropping off, that is normal, okay? That happens. Like an oak tree that has millions of leaves. The coastal live oaks this time of year will drop a huge expense of leaves, and people call and they freak out, oh my God, my oak tree needs more water, it drops millions of leaves. Since yesterday I've raked. So it happens. Plants are cyclic, they bloom in a certain cycle, they drop their foliage during periods of drought, periods of stress. Chances are if a plant is going through a stressful period like dropping leaves, it's either about to bloom or it has just bloomed, or it has gone through an extremely drought period and it's changed to a wetter environment, or vice versa. So just look at the last month with what's going on with your plant, and you might be able to figure out, okay, I don't need to water anymore because this is a shoulder period between the wet and the dry season, or it just bloomed, the plant's exhausted, and it's like, okay, I gotta drop these leaves and I'm gonna form new leaves as the hormones run through the plant. So just sort of knowing that helps you a little bit with making those decisions on whether you need to fertilize. Organic fertilizers can be done often. Every 2 to 3 weeks, every month if you want. You're feeding the soil. So remember, you're feeding all those guys beneath there. Okay, another thing I mentioned earlier about trimming with this. So if you're trimming your hedges, don't worry, I'm not going to do that. But if you're trimming these here, what's happening is that you're cutting the leaves in half. Most likely you're cutting them into half, and you're shredding the leaves. And what happens then, the leaf dries out. The plant is transpirating anyway. So when you do cuts on a plant like that, the plant loses more water from the leaf. So if you've got a ficus hedge, it doesn't matter, because ficus are really fast growers. But on some of your other plants, you definitely do not want to do shearing. You probably would want to do what we call feather pruning, which is going in and manually trimming out what you don't want. Because what we're doing really is we're cutting the stems and not the leaves. We're redirecting the growth.
Can a bougainvillea withstand that kind of
Yes,
shear cutting?
yes.
Okay,
If you know the plant, bougainvilleas will come back in no time.
Yes, it seems
Absolutely.
to be, okay.
But some plants are more sensitive. Now, I would not do that to any of my manzanitas.
Yeah.
Manzanitas are very slow to grow. If you've got a limb that's coming way out over here, and several, I think you want to go in and direct the growth, shape the plant aesthetically. Also, times where you would want to prune is when the plant is got diseased limb, if you've got any cross branching going on where it might cause friction between the two limbs, you want to remove one of those. Aesthetically, you want the plant to be balanced. You want it to look balanced, natural but balanced, not a globe topiary that you see at Disney or in some of the yards, you know. Then also structural damage. Someone backed their car into your shrub or your tree, then you need to go in there and do your trimming to make it a better plant so it doesn't get disease, and sit back and let it just, you know, take care of itself. Okay, so that being said, I had a client with an old pine tree. It's a beautiful, I don't know the name of the pine, I think it was a black pine, but anyway, we had to remove this limb because it was like this, and the other limbs were perfectly full with green needles and very healthy. So I'm going to show you a little bit how to do a small limb removal on a tree. Let's do, this is our tree here, and then the limb grows out like this, and then it grows out. I'm not the best illustrator, I'll be the first to tell you that, so we can kind of imagine. Okay, that's a limb.